Hello, and thank you for watching. My name is Bradford Roberts, Principal Broker, Founder, and Owner of TR Realty in the Las Vegas area. After watching this video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel. Download the pertinent handouts for this video by clicking the link in the comments below. Now let's get started. This video is entitled Contract Excellence. Just a note that this class is not going to make any sense to you unless you have the handouts in front of you. So please pause the video, click on the handouts, make sure you have all of the forms in front of you or you're going to be really lost. This class today is all about the art of writing an offer. You know, anyone can learn how to write an offer, but can you write an offer that gets accepted? Because if you're going to succeed in real estate, you have to know the strategies, the backstory, the nuances of this offer so that your offer gets accepted. If there are 5 agents writing an offer on a property, 4 agents go hungry and 1 gets to feed their family. Which one do you want to be? So that's what today's class is all about. We're going to be checking your skills today. So please have that RPA, the Residential Purchase Agreement, in front of you right now. At the very top of the form, it says Residential Purchase Agreement and Joint Escrow Instructions. You might remember from my video series Class 2, the segment that we do about title and escrow, that says that a title company doesn't work for a buyer or a seller. The title company works for the buyer and the seller. It is mutual. The title company cannot take unilateral action on behalf of one side. The title company has to take bilateral or mutual instructions from the parties. And this contract is a roadmap to the transaction. This is what they need to follow. It's a financial breakdown, and it contains many other things that we'll be getting into today so that the title company can follow this contract and help us to effectuate our legally binding contract. Let's begin on line 3, where we're going to write today's date, not the date that we're going to take possession of the property, not the effective date, but actually today's date, plain and simple, is going to go on line 3. On line 4, we're going to write in the name or names of the buyers. Let's talk a little bit about that. Later on in this contract, I'm going to bring your attention to language that says, unless specified otherwise, this contract is not assignable. So I'm going to show you here how to make it assignable in case you need that. Let's say, as an example, we are working with John and Mary Smith. And John Smith is here in Southern Nevada. He's in front of you, he's available, and he's going to be able to easily sign this offer. But Mary, on the other hand, is not. She might be back in her home city, she might be traveling, she might be otherwise occupied. If we put on line 4, John and Mary Smith, there are 2 people now who need to sign this offer before you can submit it, right? John and Mary Smith. And sometimes that time delay of getting that second person on board to sign and send it back to you is just enough to cause you to lose out to another prospective buyer. So there's a way to shorten that time period, which will enable you to submit your offer quicker. And the quicker you can submit the offer, the higher chance you have at acceptance. So we can put here, instead of John and Mary Smith, we can do John and or Mary Smith. And now we actually have 3 possible buyers. Yep, 3. John Smith is a buyer. Mary Smith is a buyer. John and Mary Smith would be your 3rd buyer. So by putting John and or Mary Smith, if John is here in front of you and Mary's not, John can sign this offer and you can get it submitted right away. This would also work in the case of someone who's not sure if they want to take title in their own name or in the name of an LLC or their business or what have you. We can always make that adjustment later. There are times that we need to make the adjustment later anyway. Let's say we put John and Mary Smith, and at some point the lender determines, hey, John is really a deadbeat, and he's going to drag this whole thing down. We need to get him off of this contract, and we need to put this property in the name of Mary Smith. We can do an addendum later on that removes John from this line and leaves the contract in the name of Mary Smith. Or the other way we could go is sometimes you might write an offer in someone's name, and then the lender determines later on that that person alone cannot qualify for the mortgage. So we need to bring a spouse, a partner, or a co-signer into the transaction. The point I'm trying to make is that we will have the luxury of time later on to do an addendum, to change it from John and or Mary to John and Mary, or to change it to John Smith LLC, or whatever we want to do. Right now, at this stage, we need to focus on getting this offer submitted. So that is a way that we can cut down on some of that time. It goes on to say on line 5, the property address, where we fill it in completely, including the unit number if it's a condo. Within the city or unincorporated area of, county of, we would put the city of North Las Vegas or Boulder City or Mesquite or whatever it happens to be, county of Clark or Nye, wherever the property is located. Zip code goes on line 7, followed by the APN. The APN stands for Assessor's Parcel Number, and it is absolutely required on your offer. You can get that out of the tax records, or you can get that out of the MLS, but we need the address and we need the APN on your offer. For the purchase price of, so at the end of line 7, that's where we're going to write whatever price your buyer is willing to offer. Now, if you do that in Transaction Desk, line 8 is going to auto-populate. If you're doing this by hand, line 8 is a repeat of line 7, but this time it's in words, spelled out like you would do on a check, as an example. On the terms and conditions contained herein, buyer does or does not intend to occupy the property as a residence. I want to bring your attention to the word intend. There's not a lot of legal consequence to the word intend. Intend is not a word that's legally binding. It's referred to as a weasel word, such as, I intend to love you in the morning, okay? Now, I'm not saying that we should use the flexibility in the word intend as a way to lie or misrepresent or commit fraud of any kind. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if a buyer chooses, let's say does, and then before close of escrow decides, you know, I'm not going to move into this house after all, I'm going to use this as an investment property, we're not going to need an addendum at that point because of the relatively minor consequence to the word intend. Now, if your buyer is getting an FHA mortgage product or a VA mortgage product, we definitely want to check the box that says does, because in the case of an FHA or a VA, the lender is going to look at this to ensure that the buyer is not intending to use the property as an investment. Of course, FHA and VA require occupancy by the owner or occupancy by the owner for at least some period of time and immediately upon close of escrow. So we would need to pay attention and choose does on line 9. However, I just want to say that most sellers would prefer to sell a property to someone who's going to occupy it. A lot of sellers, they feel funny about someone who's going to take their property and profit from it, either as a rental property or perhaps as a flip. So again, I'm not saying that we would ever want to misrepresent here. However, if the buyer is unsure whether he is going to occupy the property or not, as long as he's getting cash or conventional finance, paying cash or getting a conventional mortgage, I should say, then it really doesn't matter here if he indicates does or does not. Okay, let us move on to the absolutely critical paragraph number 1. And not only do you need the RPA in front of you, but I highly recommend that you have a calculator in front of you as well, because we will be doing some math, and unless you are a college level math professor, you may have some difficulty with the math, and it might make it easier to have a calculator. So go ahead and pause if you need to and get a calculator in front of you. Okay, paragraph 1 is the financial terms and conditions. It is the complete breakdown of how the buyer intends to pay for the property. This is of major consequence to the seller, and the way we construct this paragraph can have a tremendously significant impact on whether our offer is chosen or whether our offer is rejected. So we need to understand all the nuances, all the concepts of paragraph 1. So please pay very, very careful attention as we break this down. Also, I'm going to take these out of order for a reason. I think the order in which I do them in this video will make a lot more sense to you than just simply going through them sequentially. So I'd like to begin actually with 1G. Let's bring our attention down to line 40, 1G, which says total purchase price. This price does not include closing costs, prorations, or other fees or costs associated with the purchase of the property as defined herein. G is very simple because there on line 40, all I want you to fill in is the purchase price that we put at the top on line 7. Line 7 and line 40 are the exact same number. And since G is the total purchase price, it is a mathematical sum of everything that comes before it. Let me say that differently. A through F must total up to G. So after you're done constructing this paragraph with all the financing and everything else that's in here, be sure to grab a calculator, add A, B, C, D, E, and F. If they total up to G, you're good. If A through F do not total up to G, you have a mistake. There are no exceptions. A through F equal G, or you have made an error on your contract. And by the way, if you make an error on this paragraph, you have an incredibly high likelihood of being rejected, because another agent is going to look at this ridiculous error and they're not going to want to work with someone like that because they know that it's going to be a challenge throughout the entire transaction. You probably don't know what you're doing. So make sure A through F total up to G. So we've got G figured out now. That's good. 1 down and 6 to go. Let's go back and take a look at paragraph 1A. On line 13, we have a chance to enter a dollar amount equal to the earnest money deposit that I'm going to refer to from here on in as the EMD. The word earnest means sincere. Line 13 is a chance for your buyer to show how sincere they are. The vast majority of agents will go into MLS, they'll look at the EMD that is suggested, yes, suggested, and then like a monkey, when they write an offer, they will put that exact amount into 1A. Boring, uninspired, and nothing unique about it. You can't do that, folks, and then sit back and cry that your offers never get accepted. If there's, let's say, $2,000 in MLS and you come here to line 13 and you put $2,000, what do you think 95% of the other agents are doing? So why would they choose you? There's nothing special about it. So keeping in mind that EMD stands for earnest money, if your buyer is in the game and they want to show sincerity that they really want this property, this is a chance to put a different amount of EMD. Yes, the amount of EMD we put here is at risk. It's at risk for the buyer. But keep something in mind. What's at risk for the buyer is a sense of security for the seller. So the higher the EMD that we put in 1A, the riskier it is for the buyer, but the more the seller likes it. So depending on market conditions, depending on whether it's a multiple offer situation, depending on how long the property has been sitting on the market, we should take this opportunity to use paragraph 1A as a strategy. Please don't just copy what you see in MLS. It says, is presented with this offer or something else. Whenever you see or, we have to make a choice. We can't leave it blank, and or does not allow us to choose both. So we need to choose either presented with this offer, or we need to check the second box. If we choose presented with this offer, you have to have it in your hands. A check, a bank check, a money order, you have to have it in your hands. You can't choose presented with this offer if you're going to go pick it up from the buyer's hotel tomorrow. That's not going to work. Presented with this offer means you have it in your hands. And if you don't have it in your hands, you have to choose that second box after the word or, and then you got to tell me what it is. Perhaps wired upon acceptance, which is probably the most common use of that line. So you have to say what method that's going to be, what vehicle that's going to be. If you check that second box, go ahead and write it in on line 14. Upon acceptance, earnest money to be deposited within 1 business day. So we can go ahead and we can change that, of course, with my assistance as your broker. I can help you to do that, but I just want to bring your attention to the fact that the standard language in this RPA says that earnest money needs to be deposited within 1 business day, or there is another choice, some business days if wired. If your buyer is domestic, my recommendation here is to put 1 or 2 days. You can't put 1 to 2, you need to pick an actual number. But my recommendation is either 1 or 2 business days. If your buyer is international, you probably want to choose somewhere between 3 and 5 days. Again, not putting a range, putting an actual number, but we want to leave a little more time for an international wire. And then we have the choice of escrow holder, buyer broker trust account, or seller broker trust account. At TR Realty, it's always escrow holder. We don't hold, and we would not want another broker to hold anyone's earnest money in their trust account. So check the box that says escrow holder. And then there's a little note to a prospective buyer there. It is a felony in the state of Nevada, punishable by up to 4 years in prison and a $5,000 fine to write a check for which there are insufficient funds. So just a little warning to the buyer that he should not be writing a rubber check. So that is the construct of paragraph 1A. That is how we handle the earnest money deposit. All right, so let us move on to paragraph 1B. Paragraph 1B is not frequently used by agents. I don't know if it's a lack of understanding or what the reason really is, but this can actually be a really important paragraph in terms of getting your offer accepted and showing sincerity on the part of the buyer. So paragraph 1B, as you can clearly see, is the additional deposit. On line 20, we have the opportunity to put in the amount of an additional deposit if we choose to use it. It says additional deposit to be placed in escrow on or before some date. So you can choose an actual hard date, like a calendar date, to put in here if you wish, or you could choose to tie this to some event, which is how I like to use this paragraph. And in fact, my favorite way to use this paragraph is to put where it says date, put in the words upon close of due diligence. So you could tie it to an event like when the due diligence period is over. At that point, the buyer is willing to put up an additional deposit. Or you could say, 10 days after effective date, or you could say upon loan approval, or that's what I'm saying. You have the option there to either put an actual date or to put in some event in the transaction. It says the additional deposit will or will not be considered part of the EMD. So you have a very important decision to make here. If you choose will be considered part of the EMD, you're actually increasing the risk that the buyer could lose this additional deposit. And we're going to get much deeper into this RPA before we might understand why. But if we make that amount of money in 1B part of that EMD, if that EMD is lost or forfeit for some reason, that's going to include the amounts in 1A and 1B combined. However, anything that's risky for the buyer, remember, is something that's beneficial to the seller. So it is a point of negotiation. And the choice will not be considered part of the EMD. Definitely improves the safety of that money for the buyer. There's an incredibly high likelihood that his additional deposit will be refunded to him. If we choose, will not be considered part of the EMD. But again, that reduces the value of that a little bit to the seller. And it says any conditions on the additional deposit should be set forth in section 28. 28 herein, 28, if you look forward, you'll notice is additional terms. So this is an opportunity for you to get a little bit creative and to show just how interested your buyer is in the property. Because again, a lot of agents don't use paragraph 1B. So you can use 1A and 1B together. You could, as an example, put up half the EMD in paragraph 1A and the other half as an additional deposit in 1B. Or you could put up, part of it in A and the rest of it in B. You could put the EMD in A, and then in B you could give even more deposit. Remember, the more money that we put on the table, the more sincere or earnest we seem, and the higher likelihood that the offer is going to be accepted. So that is how I recommend we use paragraph 1B. Now, we're actually going to skip paragraph 1C and come back to it. I want to bring your attention next to paragraph 1D, which begins on line 27. So it says, this agreement is contingent upon buyer qualifying to assume the following existing loans. Paragraph 1D is only used in the case of assumable financing. In 1982, the United States Supreme Court ruled that a due on sale clause was legal and enforceable. Before 1982, a lot of financing around the United States was assumable. In fact, some of it was assumable without the buyer even having to qualify. But in 1982, lenders started using what's called a due on sale clause. And that's a long time ago, right? So the vast majority of people watching this video right now have not been practicing real estate since before 1982, I'm assuming, and therefore you might not know. But when you practice real estate today, you're in the habit of knowing that when a seller sells a property, his mortgage gets paid off at closing. That is something that you think is the law of the land, and it pretty much is because of that due on sale clause. However, there may be some very, very rare cases where you come across assumable financing. And if that's the case, we're going to go ahead and use paragraph 1D. We're going to write the amount of the assumable financing on line 27, and then we have to make a choice. Is that existing loan conventional? Is it FHA? Or is it VA? Or it could even be something else. It could be hard money. It could be USDA financing or other things as well. And then we have a chance on line 30 where we can indicate whether it's a fixed rate or an adjustable rate mortgage and how many years are remaining. It says seller further agrees to provide the promissory note and the most recent monthly statement of all loans to be assumed by buyer within 5 calendar days of acceptance of offer. So the reason that we are able to put in something like whether it's fixed or adjustable, how many years are remaining on the loan, what type of financing it is, it's because it's an existing loan. We're not hypothecating on this. We're not creating some illusionary terms as a way to give the buyer a loophole out of the transaction. This is existing financing. But for all intents and purposes, In today's real estate practice, this paragraph is probably not used 99.9% of the time. So overwhelmingly, D is going to be blank, except in the case of assumable financing that the buyer is taking over upon close of escrow. And let's move on to paragraph 1E. There's actually 4 different things in paragraph 1E that I want to cover with you. So starting on line 34, it says, buyer to execute a promissory note secured by a deed of trust per terms in the financing addendum which is attached here too. Paragraph 1E is all about seller financing, a situation where the seller is in the position to act as either the first lien holder or the second lien holder. So if the buyer is coming to the table with some cash and the seller wants to take payments on the rest instead of having the buyer get another kind of mortgage, that would be putting the seller in the first position. If the buyer is getting a first mortgage from a regular lender, but the seller is helping the buyer to finance some of the down payment, that would put the seller in second position. But regardless, if the seller is doing any kind of financing for the buyer at all, that's the case when we're going to use paragraph 1E. Now, before we get into the 4 things that I want to cover in paragraph 1E, I want to mention that over the years, there's been a lot of confusion between seller financing and a lease option. Please check out my video series, Class 8. In that video series, I will be getting into lease options. A lease option is a situation where someone takes occupancy of a property as a tenant, and they're actually paying rent until such time as they choose to exercise their option to purchase the property. In a lease option situation, it is the owner of the property or the seller, depending on how you want to look at his role, who actually has the deed to the property. The deed is in his name. As opposed to seller financing, where ownership of the property does convey from the seller to the buyer. So in that case, the buyer is not paying rent. He now owns the property, but instead of making mortgage payments to a lender, he's making those mortgage payments directly to the seller. So that is the inherent difference between a lease option and seller financing. So in the case of seller financing, if your buyer is writing an offer and he wishes to ask the seller to finance either in first or second position, that's when we would use paragraph 1E. Let's break it down. It says buyer to execute a promissory note. A promissory note, which is typically drafted by the title company, is all of the financial terms and conditions of the seller financing. So the promissory note would contain information like how much is being borrowed, what is the interest rate, what is the date of the first payment, what is the term of the loan, after how many days would it be considered delinquent, what is the late fee going to be charged, who is servicing the loan, is this an amortized loan, is it interest only? All of the financial breakdown of that loan would be in that promissory note. And it says a promissory note secured by a deed of trust. So a deed of trust is what we call a mortgage in Nevada. A lot of states have mortgages, so we're comfortable with the simple term mortgage. A lot of us use that, even though technically in Nevada we don't have mortgages, we have deeds of trust. There are some differences. The primary difference for our purpose, the thing that I want you to know, is that deeds of trust are in non-judicial foreclosure states, which Nevada is a non-judicial foreclosure state. Mortgages are in judicial foreclosure states. States like New York, as an example, are judicial foreclosure states. So, promissory note secured by a deed of trust. The deed of trust is the actual document, the proof of ownership. It is recorded in the county where the property is located. The promissory note is not recorded. The promissory note is the terms and conditions. The deed of trust is the security instrument for the seller in case of in the case that the buyer defaults on that promissory note. It goes on to say, per terms in the financing addendum. Notice the words financing addendum are in quotes, and that's because this is an actual form that you need to use. It's a form found in Transaction Desk, and the financing addendum is where you would offer whatever terms. This is how much I would like the seller to finance. This is the interest rate that I'm offering. This is the first payment date that I'm offering. This is the structure of the loan, etc., etc. All of that would be in that financing addendum form that you would have to fill out along with this RPA to present that offer to the listing agent. And then lastly, it says, which is attached hereto. Very important words, because it's telling you that an offer that contains anything in paragraph 1E must be accompanied by that financing addendum. And of course, as is the case with any addendum to the RPA, we need to go to paragraph 27, which says addendum attached, and we need to write in the words, the name of an addendum, and in this case, we would write in the words financing addendum, okay? So if there's seller financing that's part of your offer, make sure you use that financing addendum, make sure you indicate that in paragraph 27, and then you go ahead and you fill out all of the terms of that financing addendum, which becomes a part of the offer. Now I want to go back to paragraph 1C. And this is a paragraph where we get lots and lots of mistakes. So please listen carefully to paragraph 1C. When we look at line 24, this is where we write in the amount of the new financing. 1C says this agreement is contingent upon buyer qualifying for a new loan. This is what most buyers choose to do when they're not paying cash. They have the opportunity that they can get a conventional loan, a VA loan, an FHA loan, or other types of loans exist as well. So this agreement is contingent upon buyer qualifying for a new loan. And the amount of money that we indicate in line 24 is the amount of the new loan. Let me say that again. 1C is the LTV expressed in dollars. Loan to value expressed in dollars. So if the buyer is offering $100,000 for this property and he's getting an 80% LTV, 1C is going to say $80,000. It is that simple. And I don't know why agents make this so complicated. They like to deduct the EMD. They like to multiply by their shoe size. They like to divide by the square root of the Pythagorean theorem. I don't know what the hell they're doing with paragraph 1C, but it's very, very simple. 1C is the LTV expressed in dollars, okay? And that is the amount of money that we write on line 24. And then we have to indicate, and this is really important to the seller, by the way, we have to indicate what kind of new loan is the buyer getting. Is it conventional? Is it FHA? Is it VA? Or something else? Now, if you are really paying attention, if you look at paragraph 1C versus paragraph 1D, you'll notice in paragraph 1D that there are some financial terms here. Is it fixed? Is it adjustable, right? But in paragraph 1C, those things don't exist. They used to until 2016, until the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau said, hey, real estate agents are writing in terms, this is the interest rate, this is the type of loan or whatever. We deem that to be practicing mortgage lending without a license. So in 2016, our ability to enter those terms into paragraph 1C, which keep in mind is a new loan, those things were taken away from us. And I'm glad, because interestingly, for all the years that I've been teaching this paragraph, and until the time it changed in 2016, I always instructed my associates to leave that blank, to not fill in the terms of a new loan because they don't know. They're guessing, or in some cases, they're using it as a loophole for the buyer to get out of a contract. But those have been taken away from us, and I'm very, very glad to hear that. So 1C is simply the loan to value expressed in a dollar amount. All right, so one more thing I want to get to before we move on to paragraph 1F. I just want to mention that a lot of people ask me about VA loans because there are seller-mandated closing costs in a VA situation, and that would, of course, reduce the amount of seller proceeds if the seller chooses to accept a VA loan. Right now, those closing costs are running somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,500. So $1,500 less that the seller would get if he chooses an offer from a VA buyer. So I want to bring your attention now to 1F. Let's go down to line 37 where it says balance of purchase price or balance of down payment in good funds to be paid prior to COE. Let's take a look at that carefully. Notice the word good funds has a capital G and a capital F. There's a reason for that, because this is referring to the Good Funds Law of 2009, which says that a title company is required to have verifiable funds before close of escrow. So unlike years gone by, title companies cannot take paper instruments at or immediately before close of escrow. Typically, title companies like at least a 10-day window where if somebody wants to bring a cashier's check or a money order to the title company for closing, they're welcome to do that, but it takes about 10 days before they can actually close escrow. So within that last 10 days or so period, a buyer is required to send those closing funds by wire. So that way the title company can verify those funds and they can proceed to close of escrow and they can be in compliance with the Good Funds Law of 2009. And folks, keeping in mind that A through F equal G, F is easy to calculate. Take G, which is the total offer, subtract A, B, C, D, and E, and the balance goes on line F. And that is the amount that your buyers will bring to the closing table immediately before close of escrow, sometimes known as the balance of the down payment. Okay, I hope that helps you to understand paragraph 1 a lot more clear. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through this paragraph with some mathematical examples. Let's start with the easy one, which would be a cash offer. In a typical cash offer, we're going to put something in 1A for your earnest money. We may choose to put something in 1B. 1C is going to be blank because there's no new financing. D is going to be blank because there's no assumable financing. E is going to be blank because there's no seller financing. What we're going to do is take the offering price, subtract the earnest money in 1A, subtract the additional deposit in 1B, and we're going to put the balance on 1F. So in that case, A, B, and F are going to total up to G. Let's do scenario number 2, which is conventional financing. In the case of conventional financing, we need to know the LTV that the buyer wishes to obtain. So we can check with the lender, what is the loan to value? Let's use easy numbers. Let's talk about a $100,000 offer so the numbers are nice and round. If your buyer is going to get a 75% loan to value on a $100,000 purchase, line 1C is going to be $75,000. It's that simple, loan to value. Don't mess with it. So in that case, we would have probably earnest money in 1A. We may or may not choose to do an additional deposit in 1B. We have the amount of the loan on 1C, and then we have the balance of the purchase price on 1F. So in the case of conventional financing, we probably have 1A, B, C, F, and those total up to G. Conventional financing would leave D and E blank. Let's take a look at scenario number 3, which would be FHA financing. Probably the same. We're going to have earnest money in A. We may or may not use an additional deposit in B. We have the amount of financing, which in the case of FHA can go as high as 96.5% loan to value. That's going to go in C. D and E would be blank. The balance would go on line F, and the total of all of the above would be on G. Now, I want to talk a little bit of strategy here for FHA. Most of the time, when buyers get FHA financing, they max out the loan. They go all the way to that 96.5% financing. They don't have to, but most of them, they do. So what a lot of buyers' agents think, incorrectly, by the way, is they think that A, the earnest money, and B, the additional deposit, cannot exceed 3.5% of the purchase price. Do you understand what I'm saying here? They're getting 96.5% financing. They only have to come up with 3.5% out of their pocket. So a lot of agents think between the earnest money in A and the additional deposit in B, that those two combined cannot go over 3.5%. And then I've seen lots of agents say, well, if it does go over 3.5%, we're just going to deduct that from the loan. Wait, you're not listening if you do that. C is the LTV. I told you don't mess with it. So if they're getting 96.5% financing, that's the dollar amount that goes in C, end of story, regardless of what goes in A and B. And a lot of buyer's agents, since they don't understand this, will put the same earnest money down offer after offer after offer. There might be a seller who receives 2, 3, 20 offers from FHA buyers, all of them exactly the same financial construct. Again, if you're going to do that, don't come back and cry when your offer is not accepted. And by the way, how much money do you earn when you show a property but you can't get an offer accepted? So, a little strategy I want to share with you is that A and B combined can absolutely exceed 3.5% in an FHA offer. Remember that A through F total G? So how do you handle that? If you've got, let's say, an additional deposit and earnest money that together total 5%, and then you're getting 96.5% loan, does that add up? You're up to 101.5%. Folks, have you ever heard of a negative number? That is what would go on line F, a minus 1.5%, but of course expressed in dollars, not expressed as a percentage. Don't you think the buyer has closing costs? So if we combine the earnest money and the additional deposit and we go above the 3.5% cumulatively, that's the buyer's money. And on line F, that's going to be expressed as a negative number, and the buyer is going to get that money back. Now, if we go so far above that we've already covered the closing costs and there's still an additional deposit, well, in that case, the buyer is going to walk out of closing with a refund. It's a deposit, like putting up a security deposit as an example. He's going to get the money back. And it's that kind of creativity, that kind of understanding of how we can construct an offer that is going to make the difference between your offer getting accepted or you being thrown in the scrap pile. And that exact strategy that I just shared with you can also work in the case of a VA mortgage. Many of you know that when a buyer gets a VA mortgage, they're putting only $1 down. So what do you think is palatable to the seller? That we put up a $1 EMD? Do you think a lot of sellers are willing to tie up their property for weeks on end with a $1 EMD? Oh my God, the buyer put $1 at risk. What if he defaults? That's pretty ridiculous, right? So this is another reason why agents struggle to have a VA offer accepted as well. So folks, in the case of a VA offer, be smart. Put a real earnest money deposit down on the table. Go ahead, feel free to use that additional deposit in 1B as well. And then everything except $1 is actually going to be credited to the buyer at closing that he can use for his closing costs, or if it's too much, he actually gets a rebate. Does that make sense? Folks, that is how we knock it out of the park with paragraph 1. And don't forget, on the bottom of the page, we need to have the buyer's name and property address, which will auto-populate if you're doing this in Transaction Desk, and we need to have the buyer's initials at this stage as well. That is how we do paragraph 1. I would like to thank you for watching this video. I hope it was informative for you. If you are licensed with another brokerage in Southern Nevada and would like to talk with me, please text me or visit our website. See you next time.